Once again, welcome. So we are finally picking back up with King in Yellow. So we will go ahead and get started. Next part. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of this. Okay. All right. The Prophet's Paradise. If but the vine and love abjuring band are in the Prophet's Paradise to stand. Alack, I doubt the Prophet's Paradise were empty as the hollow of one's hand. The studio. He smiled, saying, "Seek her throughout the world." I said, "Why tell me of the world? My world is here, between these walls and the sheet of glass above. Here among gilded flagons and dull jeweled arms, tarnished frames and canvases, black chests and high-backed chairs, quaintly carved and stained in blue and gold." "For whom do you wait?" he said, and I answered, "When she comes, I shall know her." On my hearth a tongue of flame whispered secrets to the whitening ashes. In the street below I heard footsteps, a voice, and a song. "For whom do you wait?" he said, and I answered, "I shall know her." Footsteps, a voice, and a song in the street below, and I knew the song, but neither the steps nor the voice. "Fool," he cried, "the song is the same, but the voice and the steps have but changed with years." On the hearth a tongue of flame whispered above the whitening ashes. "Wake no more, they have passed, the steps and the voice in the street below." Then he smiled, saying, "For whom do you wait? Seek her throughout the world?" I answered, "My world is here, between these walls and the sheet of glass above. Here among gilded flagons and dull jeweled arms, tarnished frames and canvases, black chests and high-backed chairs, quaintly carved and stained in blue and gold." The phantom. The phantom of the past would go no further. "It is true," she sighed, "that you find in me a friend. Let us turn back together. We will forget here, under the summer sky." I held her close, pleading, caressing. I seized her, white with anger, but she resisted. "If it is true," she sighed, "then you find in me a friend. Let us turn back together. The phantom of the past would go no further." The sacrifice. I went into a field of flowers whose petals are whiter than snow and whose hearts are pure gold. Far afield a woman cried, "I have killed him I loved," and from a jar she poured blood upon the flowers whose petals are whiter than snow and whose hearts are pure gold. Far afield I followed, and on the jar I read 1,000 names, while from within the fresh blood bubbled to the brim. "I have killed him I loved," she cried. "The world's athirst, now let it drink." She passed, and far afield I watched her pouring blood upon the flowers whose petals are whiter than snow and whose hearts are pure gold. Destiny. I came to the bridge, which few may pass. "Pass," cried the keeper, but I laughed, said, "There is time," and he smiled and shut the gates. To the bridge which few may pass come young and old. All were refused. Idly I stood and counted them until wearied of their noise and lamentations. I came again to the bridge which few may pass. Those in the throng about the gate shrieked out, "He comes too late," but I laughed, saying, "There is time." "Pass," cried the keeper as I entered, then smiled and shut the gates. The throng. There where the throng was thickest in the streets, I stood with Perrault. All eyes were turned on me. "What are they laughing at?" I asked, but he grinned, dusting the chalk from my black cloak. "I cannot see. It must be something droll. Perhaps an honest thief." All eyes were turned on me. "He has robbed you of your purse," they laughed. "My purse," I cried. "Perrault, help. It is a thief." They laughed. "He has robbed you of your purse." Then Truth stepped out holding a mirror. "If he is an honest thief," cried Truth, "Perrault shall find him with his mirror." But he only grinned, dusting the chalk from my black cloak. "You see," he said, "Truth is an honest thief. She brings you back your mirror." All eyes were turned on me. Arrest truth, I cried, forgetting it was not a mirror but a purse I lost, standing with Perrault there where the throng was thickest in the streets. The jester. Was she fair, I asked, but he only chuckled, listening to the bells jingling on his cap. Stabbed, he tittered. Think of the long journey, the days of peril, the dreadful nights. Think how he wandered for her sake, year after year, through hostile lands, yearning for kith and kin. Yearning for better. Yearning for her. Stabbed, he tittered, listening to the bells jingling on his cap. Was she fair, I asked, but he only snarled, muttering to the bells jingling in his cap. She kissed him at the gate, he tittered, but in the hall his brother's welcome touched his heart. Was she fair, I asked. Stabbed, he chuckled. Think of the long journey, the days of peril, the dreadful nights. Think how he wandered for her sake year after year through hostile lands, yearning for kith and kin, yearning for her. She kissed him at the gate, but in the hall his brother's welcome touched his heart. Was she fair, I asked, but he only snarled, listening to the bells jingling in his cap. The green room. The clown turned his powdered face to the mirror. If to be fair is to be beautiful, he said, who can compare with me in my white mask? Who can compare with him in his white mask? I asked of Death beside me. Who can compare with me, said Death, for I am paler still. You are very beautiful, sighed the clown, turning his powdered face from the mirror. The love test. If it is true that you love, said Love, then wait no longer. Give her these jewels which would dishonor her, and so dishonor you in loving one dishonored. If it is true that you love, said Love, then wait no longer. I took the jewels and went to her, but she trod upon them, sobbing, Teach me to wait, I love you. Then wait, if it is true, said Love. There's the end of that section. Okay, next story is the Street of the Four Winds. We've got a French opening. Hold on, let me see if I can... Okay, wait. Okay, let's see. Google says, half close your eyes, cross your arms over your breast, and from your sleeping heart chase away all purpose forever. I sing of nature, the evening stars, the morning tears, the sunsets on the distant horizon, the sky that speaks to the heart of future existence. The animal paused on the threshold, interrogative, alert, ready for flight if necessary. Seven laid down his pallet and held out a hand of welcome. The cat remained motionless, her yellow eyes fastened upon Severn. Puss, he said, in his low, pleasant voice, come in. The tip of her thin tail twitched uncertainly. Come in, he said again. Apparently, she found his voice reassuring, for she slowly settled upon all fours, her eyes still fastened upon him, her tail tucked under her gaunt flanks. He rose from his easel smiling. She eyed him quietly, and when he walked toward her, she watched him bend over her without a wince. Her eyes followed his hand until it touched her head. Then she uttered a ragged mew. It had long been Severn's custom to converse with animals, probably because he lived so much alone. And now he said, What's the matter, Puss? Her timid eyes sought his. I understand, he said gently. You shall leave at once. Then, moving quietly about, he busied himself with the duties of a host. Rinsed a saucer, filled it with the rest of the milk from the bottle on the windowsill, and kneeling down, crumbled a roll into the hollow of his hand. The creature rose and crept toward the saucer. With the handle of a palette knife, he stirred the crumbs and milk together and stepped back as she thrust her nose into the mess. He watched her in silence. Time to time, the saucer clinked upon the tiled floor as she reached for a morsel on the rim. At last, the bread was all gone, and her purple tongue traveled over every unlicked spot until the saucer shone like polished marble. Then she sat up, and coolly turned her back to him. Began her ablutions. "Keep it up," said Severin, much interested. "You need it." She flattened one ear, but neither turned nor interrupted her toilet. As the grime was fully removed, Severin observed that nature had intended her for a white cat. Her fur had disappeared in patches from disease or the chance of war. Her tail was bony and her spine sharp. But what charms she had were becoming apparent under vigorous licking, and he waited until she had finished before reopening the conversation. But at last she closed her eyes and folded her paws under her breast. He began very gently. "Puss, tell me your troubles." At the sound of his voice, she broke into a harsh rumbling which he recognized as an attempt to purr. He bent over to rub her cheek, and she mewed again, an amiable, inquiring little mew, to which she replied, "Certainly you are greatly improved, and when you recover your plumage you'll make a gorgeous bird." Much flattered, she stood up and marched around and around his legs, pushing her head between them and making pleased remarks, to which he responded with great politeness. "Now what sent you here?" he said. "Here in the Street of the Four Winds, and up 5 flights to the very door where you would be welcome. Was it that you prevented your meditated flight when I turned from my canvas to encounter your yellow eyes? Are you a Latin Quarter cat, as I'm a Latin Quarter man? And why do you wear a rose-colored flowered garter buckled about your neck?" The cat had climbed into his lap, and now sat purring as he passed his hand over the thin coat. "Excuse me," he continued in lazy, soothing tones, harmonizing with her purring. "If I seem indelicate, but I cannot help musing on this rose-colored garter, flowered so quaintly and fastened with a silver clasp. For the clasp is silver. I can see the mint mark on the edge, as is prescribed by the law of the French Republic. Now why is it this garter woven of rose silk and delicately embroidered? Why is this silken garter with its silver clasp about your famished throat? Am I indiscreet when I inquire if its owner is your owner? She some aged dame living in memory of youthful vanities, fond doting on you, deporting you with her intimate personal attire? The circumference of the garter would suggest this, for your neck is thin and the garter fits you. Then again I notice most things. The garter is capable of being much enlarged. These small silver ringlets, of which I count 5, are proof of that. Now I observe that the 5th eyelet is worn out, as though the tongue of the clasp was accustomed to lie there. That seems to argue a well-rounded form." The cat curled her toes in contentment. The street was very still outside. He murmured on. "Why should your mistress decorate with an article most necessary to her at all times? Anyway, at most times. How did she come to slip this bit of silk and silver about your neck? Was it caprice of a moment, when you, before you lost your pristine plumpness, marched singing into her bedroom to bid her good morning? Of course, and she sat upon the pillows, her coiled hair tumbling to her shoulders, as you sprang upon the bed, purring. 'Good day, my lady.' It's very easy to understand," he yawned, resting his head on the back of the chair. The cat still purred, tightening and relaxing her padded claws over his knee. "Shall I tell you all about her, cat? She's very beautiful, your mistress," he murmured drowsily, "and her hair is heavy as burnished gold. I could paint her, not on canvas, for I should need shade and tones and hues and dyes more splendid than the iris of a splendid rainbow. I could only paint her with closed eyes, for in dreams alone can such colors as I need be found. For her eyes I must have azure from skies untroubled by a cloud, the skies of dreamland. For her lips, roses from the palaces of slumberland, and for her brow, snowdrifts from mountains, which tower in fantastic pinnacles to the moons, much higher than our moon here. the crystal moons of dreamland. She is very beautiful, your mistress. The words died on his lips and his eyelids drooped. The cat, too, was asleep. Her cheek turned up upon her wasted flank, her paws relaxed and limp. Chapter 2. It is fortunate, said Severn, sitting and stretching, that we have tidied over the dinner hour, for I have nothing to offer you for supper but what may be purchased with 1 silver franc. The cat on his knee rose, arched her back, yawned, and looked at him. What shall it be? A roast chicken with salad? No, possibly you prefer beef. Of course, and I shall try an egg and some white bread. Now for the wines, milk for you? Good, I shall take a little wafer, fresh from the wood. Or I shall take a little water, fresh from the wood. The motion toward the bucket in the sink. Put on his hat and left the room. The cat followed to the door, and after he had closed it behind him, she settled down, smelling at the cracks, and cocking one ear at every creak from the crazy old building. The door below opened and shut. The cat looked serious, for a moment doubtful, and her eyes flattened in nervous expectation. Presently she rose with a jerk of her tail and started on a noiseless tour of the studio. She sneezed a pot of turpentine, hastily retreating to the table, which she presently mounted, and having satisfied her curiosity concerning a roll of red modeling wax, returned to the door and sat down with her eyes on the crack over the threshold. Then she lifted her voice in a thin plaint. When Severn returned, he looked grave, but the cat, joyous and demonstrative, marched around him, rubbing her gaunt body against his legs, driving her head enthusiastically into his hand, and purring until her voice mounted to a squeal. He placed a bit of meat, wrapped in brown paper, upon the table, and with a penknife cut it into shreds. The milk he took from a bottle which had served for medicine, and poured it into the saucer on the hearth. The cat crouched before it, purring and lapping at the same time. He cooked his egg and ate it with a slice of bread, watching her busy with the shredded meat, and when he had finished, and had filled and emptied a cup of water from the bucket in the sink, he sat down, taking her into his lap, where she had at once curled up and began her toilet. He began to speak again, touching her caressingly at times by way of emphasis. Welcome in, Ghost. Cat, I have found out where your mistress lives. It's not very far away. It is here, under this same leaky roof, but in the north wing, which I had supposed was uninhabited. My janitor tells me this. By chance, he is almost sober this evening. The butcher on the Rue des Saints, where I bought your meat, knows you, and old Caban the baker identified you with needless sarcasm. They tell me hard tales of your mistress, which I shall not believe. They say she is idle and vain, and pleasure-loving. They say she is harebrained and reckless. The little sculptor on the ground floor, who was buying rolls from old Caban, spoke to me tonight for the first time, although we have always bowed to each other. He said she was very good and very beautiful. He has only seen her once, and does not know her name. I thanked him. I don't know why I thanked him so warmly. Caban said, into this cursed street of the four winds, the four winds blow all things evil. The sculptor looked confused, but when he went out with his rolls, he said to me, I'm sure, monsieur, that she is as good as she is beautiful. The cat had finished her toilet, and now springing softly to the ground, went to the door and sniffed. He knelt beside her, unclasped the garter belt, it for a moment in his hands. After a while he said, There was a name engraved upon the silver clasp beneath the buckle. It's a pretty name. Sylvia Elvin. Sylvia is a woman's name. Elvin is the name of a town. In Paris, in this quarter above all, in this street of the four winds, names are worn and put away as fashions change with the seasons. I know the little town of Elvin, for there I met fate face to face, and fate was unkind. But do you know that in Elvin, fate had another name, and that name was Sylvia? He replaced the garter and stood up, looking out at the cat crouched before the closed door. The name of Elvin has a charm for me. It tells me of meadows and clear rivers. The name of Sylvia troubles me like perfume from dead flowers. The cat mewed. Yes, yes, he said soothingly. I will take you back. Your Sylvia is not my Sylvia. The world is wide and Elvin is not unknown. Yet in the darkness and filth of poor Paris, in the sad shadows of this ancient house, these names are very pleasant to me. He lifted her in his arms and strode through the silent corridors as the stairs down 5 flights and into the moonlit court, past the little sculptor's den, and then again in at the gate of the north wing and up the worm-eaten stairs he passed until he came to a closed door, where he had stood knocking for a long time. Something moved behind the door. It opened and he went in. The room was dark. As he crossed the threshold, the cat sprang from his arms into the shadows. He listened but heard nothing. The silence was oppressive, and he struck a match. At his elbow stood a table, and on a table a candle and gilded candlestick. This he lighted, then looked around. The chamber was vast, the hangings heavy with embroidery. Over the fireplace towered a carved mantel, gray with ashes of dead fires. In a recess by the deep-set window stood a bed, from which the bedclothes, soft and fine as lace, trailed to the polished floor. He lifted the candle above his head. A handkerchief lay at his feet. It was faintly perfumed. He turned toward the windows. In front of them was a canopy, and over it were flung, pell-mell, a gown of silk, a heap of lace-like garments, white and delicate as spiders' meshes, long crumpled gloves, and the floor beneath, the stockings, the little pointed shoes, and one garter of rosy silk, quaintly flowered and fitted with a silver clasp. Wondering, he stepped forward and drew the heavy curtains from the bed. For a moment the candle flared in his hand. Then his eyes met two other eyes, wide open, smiling, and the candle flame flashed over hair heavy as gold. She was pale, but not as white as he. Her eyes were untroubled as a child's, but he stared trembling from head to foot. The candle flickered in his hand. At last he whispered, "Sylvia, it is I." Again he said, "It is I." Then, knowing that she was dead, he kissed her on the mouth, and through the long watches of the night the cat purred on his knee, tightening and relaxing her padded claws until the sky paled above the street of the 4 winds. That's the end of that story. Okay, next one. The street of the first shell. Be of good cheer, the sullen month will die, and a good moon requite us by and by. Look how the old one, meager, bent, and wan with age and fast, is fainting from the sky. The room was already dark. The high roofs opposite cut off what little remained of the December daylight. The girl drew her chair nearer the window, and choosing a large needle, threaded it, knotting the thread over her fingers. Then she smoothed the baby garment across her knees and, bending, bit off the thread and drew the smaller needle from where it rested in the hem. When she had brushed away the stray threads and bits of lace, she laid it again over her knees, caressingly. Then she slipped the threaded needle from her corsage, and passed it through a button. But as the button spun around the thread, her hand faltered. The thread snapped, and the button rolled across the floor. She raised her head. Her eyes were fixed on a strip of waning light above the chimneys. From somewhere in the city came sounds like the distant beating of drums, and beyond, far beyond, a vague muttering, now growing, swelling, rumbling in the distance, like the pounding of surf upon the rocks, now like the surf again, receding, growling, menacing. The cold had become intense, a bitter, piercing cold which strained and snapped at joist and beam and turned the slush of yesterday to flint. From the street below, every sound broke sharp and metallic. The clatter of sabots, the rattle of shutters, or the rare sounds of a human voice. The air was heavy, weighed with the black cold as with a pall. To breathe was painful, to move an effort. In the desolate sky there was something that wearied. In the brooding clouds, something that saddened. It penetrated the freezing city cut by the freezing river. The splendid city was with its towers and domes, its quay and bridges, and its 1,000 spires. It entered the squares, it seized the avenues and the palaces, stole across the bridges, and crept among the narrow streets of the Latin Quarter. Grew under the gray of the December sky, sadness, utter sadness. A fine icy sleet was falling, powdered the pavement with a tiny crystalline dust. It sifted against window panes and drifted in heaps along the sill. The light at the window had nearly failed, and the girl bent low over her work. Presently she raised her head, brushing the curls from her eyes. "Jack, dearest, don't forget to clean your palette," he said, "all right," and picked up the palette. Set down the floor in the front of the stove. His head and shoulders were in the shadow, but the firelight fell across his knees and glimmered red on the blade of the palette knife. Full in the firelight beside him stood a color box. On the lid was carved, J. Trent, École des Beaux-Arts, 1870. The inscription was ornamented with an American and French flag. The slate blew against the window panes, covering them with stars and diamonds. Then, melting from the warmer air within, ran down and froze again in fern-like traceries. A dog whined, and the patter of small paws sounded on the zinc behind the stove. "Jack, dear, do you think Hercules is hungry?" The patter of paws was redoubled again behind the stove. "He's whining," she continued nervously. "And if it isn't because he's hungry, it's because—" Voice faltered. A low humming filled the air. The windows vibrated. "Oh, Jack," she cried. Another. Her voice was drowned in the scream of a shell tearing through the clouds overhead. "That is the nearest yet," she murmured. "No," he answered cheerfully. "It probably fell way over by Montmartre." As she did not answer, he said again with exaggerated unconcern, "They wouldn't take the trouble to fire at the Latin Quarter. Anyway, they haven't a battery that can hurt it." After a while, she spoke up brightly. "Jack, dear, are you going to take me to see Monsieur West's statues?" "I will bet," he said, throwing up his palette and walking over the windows beside her, "that Colette has been here today." "Why?" she asked, opening her eyes very wide. "Oh, it's too bad. Really, men are tiresome when they think they know everything. And I warn you that if Monsieur West is vain enough to imagine that Colette—" From the north, another shell came whistling and quavering through the sky, passing above them with long-drawn screech which led the windows singing. That, he blurted out, was too near for comfort. They were silent for a while. Then he spoke again gaily. "Go on, Sylvia," and with her poor West. But she only sighed. "Dear, I can never seem to get used to the shells." He sat down on the arm of the chair beside her. Scissors fell jingling on the floor. She tossed the unfinished frock after them, and putting both arms about his neck, drew him down into her lap. "Don't go out tonight, Jack." He kissed her uplifted face. "You know I must. Don't make it hard for me. When I hear the shells and they know you are out in the city. But they all fall in Montmartre. They may all fall in the Beaux-Arts. You said yourself that two struck the Quai d'Orsay. Mere accident. Jack, have pity on me. Take me with you. And who will there be to get dinner?" She rose and flung herself on the bed. "Can't get used to it, and I know you must go, but I beg you not to be late to dinner. If you know what I suffer, I cannot help it. You must be patient with me, dear," said. "It is as safe there as in our own house." She watched him fill for her the alcohol lamp. and when he had lighted it and taken up his hat to go, she jumped up and clung him in silence. After a moment he said, "Sylvia, remember my courage is sustained by yours. Come, I must go." She did not move, and he repeated, "I must go." Then she stepped back, and he thought she was going to speak and waited, but she only looked at him and a little impatiently. He kissed her again, saying, "Don't worry, dearest." When he reached the last flight of stairs on his way to the street, Wynne hobbled out of the housekeeper's lodge, waving a letter, calling, Monsieur Jack, this was left by Monsieur Fallowby." He took the letter and, leaning on the threshold of the lodge, read it. "Dear Jack, I believe Braith is dead broke, and I'm sure Fallowby is. Braith swears he isn't, and Fallowby swears he is. So you can draw your own conclusions. I've got a scheme for a dinner, and if it works, I will let you fellows in. Yours faithfully, West. P.S. Fallowby has shaken Hartman and his gang, thank the Lord. There is something rotten there, or maybe he's only a miser. P.P.S. I'm more desperately in love than ever, but I'm sure she does not care a straw for me." "All right," said Trent with a smile to the concierge. "Tell me, how is Papa Cottard?" The old woman shook her head and pointed to the curtained bed in the lodge. "Here, Cottard," he tried cheerily. "How goes the wound today?" He walked over the bed and drew the curtains. An old man was lying among the tumbled sheets. "Better?" smiled Trent. "Better," repeated the man wearily, and after a pause. "Have you any news, Monsieur Jack?" "I haven't been out today. I'll bring you any rumor I may hear. Though goodness knows I have odd enough of rumors," he muttered to himself, then aloud. "Cheers, you're looking better. And the sortie?" "Sortie. That's for this week. General Trochu sent orders last night." "Be terrible. Be sickening," thought Trent as he went out into the street and turned the corner toward the Rue de Son. Slaughter, phew. I'm glad I'm not going. The street was almost deserted. A few women muffled in tattered military capes crept along the frozen pavement, and a wretchedly clad gayman hovered over the sewer hole in the corner of the boulevard. A rope around his waist held his rags together. From the rope hung a rat, still warm and bleeding. "There's another in there," he yelled at Trent. "I hit him, but he got away." Trent crossed the street and asked, "How much?" 2 francs for a quarter of a fat one. That's what they give it at the Saint Germain market." A violent fit of coughing interrupted him. He wiped his face with the palm of his hand and looked cunningly at Trent. "Last week you could buy a rat for 6 francs, but," said he somewhere lively, "the rats have quite the Rue de Son, and they killed him now over by the new hospital. I'll let you have this one for 7 francs. I can sell it for 10 in the Isle of St. Louis." "You lie," said Trent. "Let me tell you, if you're trying to swindle anybody in this quarter, the people will make short work of you and your rats." He stood a moment eyeing the gamin, who pretended to snivel. Then he tossed a franc, laughing. The child caught it, and thrusting it into his mouth, wheeled about to the sewer hole. For a second he crouched motionless, alert, his eyes on the bars of the drain. Then leaping forward, he hurled a stone in the gutter, and Trent left him to finish a fierce gray rat with that writhe squealing at the mouth of the sewer. "Suppose Brave should have come to that," he thought, poor little chap. And hurrying, he turned to the dirty passage de Beaux-Arts and entered for the 3rd house out to the left. "Monsieur is at home," quivered the old concierge. "Home." Great absolutely bare, save for the iron bedstead in the corner and the iron basin and pitchfork on the floor. West appeared at the door, winkling with much mystery, and motioned Trent to enter Braith, who was painting in bed to keep warm, looked up and laughed and shook hands. "Any news?" Punctual question was answered as usual by nothing but the cannon. Trent sat down on the bed. "Where on earth did you get that?" he demanded, pointing to a half-finished chicken nestling in a wash basin. West grinned. You millionaires, Ooh, out with it. Rafe looked a little shamed again. It's one of West's exploits. Cut short by West, who said he would tell the story himself. See, before the siege, I had a letter of introduction to a type here. A fat banker. German-American variety. You know this species. See. Well, of course, I forgot to present the letter, but this morning, judging by a favorable opportunity, I called on him. The villain lives in comfort. Fires, my boy. Fires in the anterooms. The buttons finally condescend to carry my letter and card up, leaving me standing in the hallway, which I did not like, so I entered the first room. I saw and nearly fainted at the sight of a banquet on a table by the fire. Down comes Buttons. Very insolent. No, his master is not at home, and in fact is too busy to receive letters of introduction just now, the siege and many business difficulties. I deliver a kick to Buttons, put up this chicken from the table, tossed my cards to the empty plate, and addressing Button as a species of pig, march out with the honors of war. Trench shook his head. I forgot to say that Hartman often dines there. And I draw my own conclusions, continued West. Now about this chicken, half of it for Braith and myself, and half for Colette. But of course, you will help me eat my part, because I'm not hungry. Neither am I, began Braith. Trent, with a smile at the pinched face as before, shook his head, saying, What nonsense, you know I'm never happy. West hesitated, reddened, and then slicing off Braith's portions, but not eating any himself, had said good night, and hurried away to number 47 Rue Serpent, where lived a pretty girl named Colette, orphan after Sedan and heaven alone knew where she got the roses in her cheeks. For the siege came hard on the poor. Chicken will delight her. Believe she's really in love with West, said Trent, then talking over the bed. It's your old man. Oh, dodging you. Oh, must. You know how much have you left? The other hesitated and flushed. Come, old chap. Brave drew a purse from beneath his bolster and handed it to his friend with a simplicity that touched him. 7 sons, he counted. Make me tired. Why on earth didn't you come to me? I take it to... Braith, many times must I go over to the same thing and explain to you that because I have money, it's my duty to share. Your duty and the opportunity of every American to share it with me. You can't get a %. The city's blockaded, and the American minister has his hands full with all the German riffraff and deuce knows what. But if you act sensibly, will, Trent, but an obligation perhaps I can never grow ever and part repay. I'm poor, and because you'll pay me. If I were a user, I would take your talent. I would take your talent for security. When you are rich and famous, don't, Trent. Right, no more monkey business. He slipped a dozen gold pieces into the purse, tucking them under the mattress, smiled at Wraith. How old are you? He demanded. 16. Trent laid his hand on his friend's shoulder. I'm 22, and I have the rights of a grandfather as far as you are concerned. You do as I say until you're 21. The siege will be over then, I hope, said Braith, trying to laugh. But the prayer in their hearts, how long, O Lord, how long, was answered by the swift scream of a shell soaring among the storm clouds of the December night. Sorry, I need to stretch. We gotta do an ad break coming up, so I'm gonna do that. In between sections, so we don't have to stop bed of one. And also I need to walk around some. I'm less eepy. So I will see y'all in just a bit. Alright, sorry for the delay there. Uh-oh. Hold on. Sorry. Battery on my fan. Okay. Sorry, the battery on my air conditioning remote came out, but we're good now. Okay. Back to story. All right. All right. Chapter 2. West, standing in the doorway of a house in the Rue Serpentine, was speaking angrily. He said he didn't care whether Hartman liked it or not. He was telling him, not arguing with him. Call yourself an American, he sneered. Berlin and hell are full of that kind of American. You come loafing around Colette with your pockets stuffed with white bread and beef, and a bottle of wine at 30 francs, and you can't really afford to give $1 to the American ambulance and public assistance. But Deprave does, and he's half-starved. Hartman retreated to the curbstone, but West followed him, his face like a thundercloud. Don't you dare to call yourself a countryman of mine, he growled. No, nor an artist either. Artists don't worm themselves into the service of the public defense, where they do nothing but feed like rats on the people's food. And I'll tell you now, he continued, dropping his voice, for Hartman had started as tough. It started as though stung. You better keep away from that Alsatian brasserie, and the smug-faced thieves who haunt it. You know what they do with suspects. You lie, you hound, screamed Hartman. Screamed Hartman and flung the bottle in his hand straight at West's face. West had him by the throat in a second, and forcing him against the dead wall, shook him wickedly. Now you listen to me, he muttered through his clenched teeth. You're already a suspect, and I swear, I believe you are a paid spy. It isn't my business to detect such vermin, and I don't intend to denounce you. But understand this. Colette doesn't like you, and I can't stand you. And if I catch you in the street again, I'll make it somewhat unpleasant. Get out, you sleek Prussian. Hartman had managed to drag a knife from his pocket, but West tore it from him and hurled him into the gutter. A gamin who had seen this burst into a peal of laughter, which rattled harshly in the silent street. Then everywhere windows were raised and rows of haggard faces appeared, demanding to know why people should laugh in the starving city. Is it a victory? Murmured one. Look at that, cried West as Hartman picked himself at the paper. Look, you miser, look at those faces. But Hartman gave him a look which he never forgot, and walked away without a word. Trent, who suddenly appeared at the corner, glanced curiously at West, who merely nodded towards his door, saying, Come in, Fallowby's upstairs. What are you doing with that knife? Demanded Fallowby, as he and Trent entered the studio. West looked at his wounded hand, which still clutched the knife, but saying, Cut myself by accident, tossed it into a corner and washed the blood from his fingers. Fallowby, fat and lazy, watched him without comment, but Trent, half divining how things had turned, walked over to Fallowby, smiling. I've got a bone to pick with you, he said. Where is it? I'm hungry, replied Fallowby with affected eagerness, but Trent, frowning, told him to listen. How much did I advance you a week ago? 380 francs, replied the other with a squirm of contrition. Where is it? Fellaby began a series of intricate explanations, which were soon cut short by Trent. I know you blew it. You blew it in. You always blow it in. I don't care a rap what you did before the siege. I know you are rich and have a right to dispose of your money as you wish to, and I also know that, generally speaking, it is none of my business. But now it is my business, as I have to supply the funds until you get some more, which you won't until the siege is ended one way or another. I wish to share what I have, but I won't see it thrown out the window. But of course, I know you'll reimburse me. But that isn't the question, and anyway, it's the opinion of your friends, old man, and you will not be worse off for a little abstinence from fleshly pleasures. You are positively a freak in this famine-cursed city of skeletons. I am rather stout, he admitted. Is it true you are out of money? Demanded Trent. Yes, I am, sighed the other. That roast-sucking pig on the Rue Saint-Honor. Is it there yet? Continued Trent. What? Stammered the feeble one. Ah, I thought so. I caught you in ecstasy before that sucking pig at least a dozen times. Then laughing, he presented Fallowsby with a roll of 20 francs, saying, If these goes for luxuries, you must live on your own flesh. It went over to aid West, who sat beside the wash basin binding up his hand. West suffered him to tie the knot, and then said, Remember yesterday when I left you and Brave to take the chicken to Colette? Good heavens, moaning Fellaby. Chicken, repeated West, enjoying Fellaby's grief. That is, I must explain that things have changed. Colette and I are to be married. What? What about the chicken? Groaned Fellaby. Shut up, laughed Trent, and slipping his arm through West, walked to the stairway. Poor little thing, said West. Just think, not a splinter of firewood for a week, and wouldn't tell me which because she thought I needed it for my clay figure. I heard I smashed that smirking clay nymph to pieces, and the rest could freeze and be hanged. After a moment, he added timidly, Won't you call on your way down and say bonsoir? It's number 17. Yes, said Trent, and he went out, soft closing the door behind. He stopped on the third landing, lighted a match, and scanned the numbers over the row of dingy doors, and looked at number 17. C'est toi, George. The door dropped. Oh, pardon, Monsieur Jack. I thought it was Monsieur West. Then, blushing furiously, I see you've heard. Thank you so much for your wishes, and I'm sure we love each other very much. I'm dying to see Sylvie and tell her and what? Laughed Trent. Very happy, she sighed. He's pure gold, returned Trent, and then gaily, I want you and George to come and dine with us tonight. It's a little treat. You see, tomorrow is Sylvia's fete. She'll be 19. I've written to Thorne, and Gurnalux will come with their cousin, Odelay. Fellaby has engaged not to bring anybody but himself. The girl accepted shyly, charged him with loads of loving messages to Sylvie, and he said good night. He started up the street, walking swiftly, for it was bitter cold, and cutting across the Rue de la Lune, he entered the Rue de Seine. The early winter night had fallen, almost without warning. The sky was clear, and myriads of stars glittered in the heavens. The bombardment had become furious. A steady rolling thunder from the Prussian cannon, punctuated by the heavy shocks from Mount Valerian. The shells streamed across the sky, leaving trails like shooting stars. And now, as he turned to look back, rockets, blue and red, flared above the horizon from the fort of Issy, and the fortress of the north flamed like a bonfire. Good news! Men shouted over by the boulevard of Saint-Germain, as if by magic the streets were filled with people, shivering, glittering people with shrunken eyes. Chacus, cried one. The army of the Loire. Ah, mon vieux. It has come then at last, I told thee. Tomorrow, tonight, who knows? Is it true? Is it a sortie? Someone said, What a sortie, and my son? And they cried, The Seine? They say one can see the signals of the army of the Loire from the Pont Neuf. There was a child standing near Trent who kept repeating, Mama, then tomorrow we may eat white bread. Beside him an old man sang, stumbling his shriveled hands, crushed to his breast, muttering as if insane. Could it be true? Who has heard the news? The shoemaker on the Rue de Chiffre at it from Mobile, who had heard of Frontier, repeated to the captain of the National Guard. Trent followed the throng surging through the Rue de Seine to the river. Rocket after rocket clove the sky, and now, from Montreux the cannon clanged, and batteries on the Montpassard joined in with the crash. The bridge was packed with people. Trent asked, "Who has seen the signals of the Army of the Loire?" "We are waiting for them," was the reply. He looked toward the north. Suddenly, the huge silhouette of the Arc de Triomphe sprang into black relief against the flash of a cannon. The boom of the gun rolled along the quay, and the old bridge vibrated. Again over by the Pont du Jour, a flash and heavy explosion shook the bridge. And then the whole eastern bastion of the fortifications blazed and cracked, sending a red flame into the sky. "Has anyone seen the signals yet?" he asked again. "We are waiting," was the reply. "Yes, waiting," murmured a man behind him. "Getting sick, starved, freezing, but waiting. Sortie? They go gladly. Is it to starve? They starve. They have no time to think of surrender. Are they heroes, these Parisians? Answer me, Trent." The American ambulance surgeon turned about and scanned the parapets of the bridge. "Any news, doctor?" asked Trent mechanically. "News?" said the doctor. "I don't know any. I haven't time to know any. What are these people after?" "They say the Army of the Loire has signaled Mount Valerian." "Poor devils," the doctor glanced about him for an instant, and then, "So harried and worried that I don't know what to do. To the last sortie, we had the work of 50 ambulances on our poor little corps. Tomorrow there's another sortie, and I wish you fellows could come over to the headquarters. We may need volunteers. How is Madame?" he added abruptly. "Well," replied Trent. "She seems to grow more nervous every day. I ought to be with her now." "Take care of her," said the doctor. Then, with a sharp look at the people, "I can't stop now. Good night." And he hurried away, muttering, "Poor devils." Trent leaned over the parapet and blinked at the black river surging through the arches. Dark objects carried swiftly on the breast of the current, struck with a grinding, tearing noise against the stone piers, spun around for an instant, and hurried away into the darkness, the ice from the Marne. As he stood staring into the water, a hand was laid on his shoulder. "Hello, Southwark," he cried, turning around. "This is a queer place for you. Trent, I have something to tell you. Don't stay here. Don't believe in the Army of the Loire." And the attaché of the American legation slipped his arm through Trent's and drew him toward the Louvre. "Then it's another lie," said Trent bitterly. "Worse. We know at the legation. I can't speak of it, but that's not what I have to say. Something happened this afternoon. The Alsatian brasserie was visited. An American named Hartman has been arrested. Do you know him?" "I know a German who calls himself an American. His name is Hartman." "Well, he was arrested about 2 hours ago. They mean to shoot him." "What?" "Of course, we at the legation can't allow them to shoot him offhand, but the evidence seems conclusive." "Is he a spy?" "Well, the papers seized in his rooms are pretty damning proofs, and beside, he was caught, they say, swindling the Public Food Committee. He drew rations for 50. How, I don't know. He claims to be an American artist here, and we have been obliged to take notice of it at the legation. It's a nasty affair. To cheat the people at such a time as this is worse than robbing the poor box," cried Trent angrily. "Let them shoot him. He's an American citizen." "Yes, oh yes," said the other with bitterness. "American citizenship is a precious privilege whenever a gog-eyed German." His anger choked him. Southwark shook hands with him warmly. "It can't be helped. We must own the carrion. I'm afraid you may be called upon to identify him as an American artist," he said with a ghost of a smile in his deep lined face, and walked away through the Cours Lorraine. Trent swore silently for a moment, and then drew out his watch. 7 o'clock. Sylvia will be anxious, he thought, and hurried back to the river. The crowd still huddled shivering on the bridge, a somber, pitiful congregation peering out into the night for the signal of the Army of the Loire, and their hearts beat time to the pounding of the guns. Their eyes lighted with each flash from the bastions, and hope rose with the drifting rockets. A black cloud hung over the fortifications. From horizon to horizon, the cannon smoke stretched in wavering bands, now capping the spires and domes with cloud, now blowing in streamers and shreds among the streets, now descending from the housetops enveloping quays, bridges, and a river, in a sulphurous mist. And through this smoke pall the lightning of the cannon played, while from time to time a rift above showed a fathomless black vault set with stars. He turned again into the Rue des Sons, that sad abandoned street, with its rows of closed shutters and desolate ranks of unlighted lamps. He was a little nervous and wished once or twice for a revolver, but the slinking forms which passed him in the darkness were too weak with hunger to be dangerous. He thought, and passed on unmolested to his doorway. But there somebody sprang at his throat. Over and over the icy pavement he rolled with his assailant tearing at the noose about his neck, and then with a wrench sprang to his feet. "Get up," he cried to the other. Slowly and with great deliberation, small Gammon picked himself out of the cover and surveyed Trent with disgust. "That's a nice clean trick," said Trent. "A whelp of your age. You'll finish against a dead wall. Give me that cord." The urchin handed him the noose without a word. Trent struck a match and looked at his assailant. It was the rat killer of the day before. "I thought so," he muttered. C'est toi," said the Gammon tranquilly. The impudence, the overpowering audacity of the ragamuffin took Trent's breath away. Do you know, you young strangler," he asked, "that they shoot thieves of your age?" The child turned a passionless face to Trent. "Shoot, then." It was too much, and he turned on his heel and he entered his hotel. Groping up the unlighted stairway, he at last reached his own landing and felt about the darkness for the door. Studio came the sound of voices. West's hearty laugh and Fallowby's chuckle, and at last he found the knob and pushed back to the door, stood a moment confused by the light. "Hello, Jack," cried West, pleasant creature, inviting people to dine and letting them wait. "Here's Fallowby weeping with hunger." "He's been out rotting. Look at his nose," laughed Granalac. So now we know where you get your cash," added West. "Vive la coup de Pierre Francois." Trent shook hands with everyone and laughed at Sylvia's pale face. "Don't mean to be late. I stopped at the bridge a moment to watch the bombardment. Are you anxious, Sylvia?" Smiled and murmured, "No," but her hand dropped to his and tightened convulsively. "To the table," shouted Fallowby and uttered a joyous whoop whoop. "Take it easy," observed Thorne. "Easy," Thorne with a remnant of manners. "You're not the host, you know." Mary Gurtlock, who had been chattering with Colette, jumped up and took Thorne's arms, and Monsieur Gurtlock drew Odelay's arm through his. Trent, bowing gravely, offered his own arm to Colette. West took in Sylvia, and Fallowby hovered anxiously in the rear. "March around the table 3 times singing the Marseillaise," explained Sylvia. Monsieur Fallowby pounds on the table and beats time. Fallowby suggested they could sing after dinner, but his protest was drowning in the ringing chorus. "Ah, bottoms, for miles vos bataillons," and they marched singing "Marchons, marchons," with all their might, while Fallowby, with very bad grace, hammered on the table, consoling him a little with the hope that the exercise would increase his appetite. Hercules, the black and tan, fled under the bed. With retreat, he yapped and whined until dragged out by Gurtlock and placed in Odelay's lap. "And now," said Trent gravely. They were seated. He read the menu. "Beef soup à la Siege de Paris. Fish, sardines à la Père Lachaise, white wine. Roti, red wine. Fresh beef à la sauté, vegetables. Canned beans à la chaspot. Canned peas, gravelotte. Potatoes, irlandais, miscellaneous. Cold corned beef à la this, stewed prunes à la Garibaldi, dessert, dried prunes, white bread, currant jelly, tea, café, liqueurs, pipes, and cigarettes." Fallowby applauded frantically, and Sylvia served the soup. "Isn't it delicious?" sighed Odelay. Marigold sipped her soup in rapture. "Not at all like horse, and I don't care what they say. Horse doesn't taste like beef," whispered Colette to West. Fallowby, who had finished, began to caress his chin and eye the tureen. "Have some more, old chap," inquired Trent. "Sir Fallowby cannot have any more," announced Sylvia. I'm saving this for the concierge. Fellaby transferred his eyes to the dish. The sardines hot from the grill were a great success. While the others were eating, Sylvia ran downstairs with the soup for the old concierge and her husband. When she hurried back, flushed and breathless, and slipped into her chair with a happy smile at Trent, that young man arose and silence fell over the table. For an instant he looked at Sylvia and thought he had never seen her so beautiful. You all know, he began, that today is my wife's 19th birthday. Fallowby, bubbling with enthusiasm, waved his glass in circles about his head to the terror of Odelay and Colette, his neighbors and Thorne. West and Gernlich refilled their glasses 3 times before the storm of applause which the toast of Sylvia had provoked subsided. 3 times the glasses were filled and emptied to Sylvia, and again to Trent, who protested. This is irregular, he cried. The next toast is to the twin republics, France and America. To the republics, they cried. The toast was drunk amid shouts of Viva la France, Viva la America, Viva la Nation. Then Trent, with a smile at West, offered the toast. To a happy pair, and everybody understood. And Sylvia leaned over and kissed Colette, while Trent bowed to West. The beef was eaten in comparative calm, but when it was finished, a portion of it set aside for the old people below, Trent cried, Drink to Paris. May she rise from her ruins and crush the invader. And the cheers rang out, drowning for a moment at the monotonous thunder of the Prussian guns. Pipes and cigarettes were lighted, and Trent listened an instant to the animated chatter around him, broken by ripples of laughter from the girls or the mellow chuckle of Fallowby. Then he turned west. There's going to be a sortie tonight, he said. I saw the American ambulance surgeon just before I came in, and he asked me to speak to you fellows. Any aid we can give him will not come amiss. Then, dropping his voice and speaking in English, as for me, I shall go out with the ambulance tomorrow morning. There's of course no danger, but it's as well to keep it from Sylvia. West nodded. Thorne and Gernelek, who had heard, broke in and offered assistance. Fallowby volunteered with a groan. All right, said Trent rapidly. No more now, but meet me at ambulance headquarters tomorrow morning at 8. Sylvia and Colette, becoming uneasy at the conversation in English, now demand to know what they were talking about. Does a sculptor usually talk about? Cried West with a laugh. Odelay glanced reproachfully at Thorne, her fiancé. You're not French, you know. It's none of your business, this war, said Odelay with much dignity. Thorne looked meek, but West assumed an air of outraged virtue. It seems, he said to Fallowby, that a fellow cannot discuss the beauties of Greek sculpture in his mother tongue without being openly suspected. Colette placed her hand over his mouth and turned to Sylvia, murmured, They're horridly untruthful, these men. I believe the word for ambulance is the same in both languages, said Mary Gerlach saucily. Sylvia, don't trust Monsieur Trent. Jack, whispered Sylvia, promise me. Knock at the studio door and interrupt her. Come in, cried Fallowby, but Trent sprang up and opened the door, looked out. Then, with a hasty excuse for the rest, he stepped in the hallway and closed the door. When he returned, he was grumbling. What is it, Jack? Cried West. Is it? Cried savagely. I'll tell you what it is. I've received a dispatch from the American minister to go and at once identify and claim, as a fellow countryman and a brother artist, a rascally thief and a German spy. Don't go, suggested Fallowby. If I don't, they'll shoot him at once. Let them, growled Thorne. Do you know who it is? Hartman, shouted West, inspired. Sylvia sprang up deathly white, but Odelay slipped her arm around her and supported her to a chair, saying calmly, Sylvia's fainted. It's the hot room. Bring some water. Trent brought it at once. Sylvia opened her eyes and after a moment rose and, supported by Marie Gernelach and Trent, passed into the room. It was a signal for breaking up, and everyone came and shook hands with Trent, saying they hoped Sylvia would sleep it off and that it would be nothing. Marie Gernelach took leave of him. She avoided his eyes, but he spoke to her cordially and thanked her for her aid. Anything I can do, Jack? Inquired West, lingering, and then hurried downstairs to catch up with the rest. Trent leaned over the banisters, listening to their footsteps and chatter, and then the lower door banged and the house was silent. He lingered, staring down into the blackness, biting his lips. Then, with an impatient movement, Crazy, he muttered, lighting a candle, went up into the bedroom. Sylvia was lying on the bed, bent over, smoothing the curly hair on her forehead. "Are you better, dear Sylvia?" She did not answer, but raised her eyes to his. For an instant he met her gaze. What he read there sent a chill to his heart and sat down, covering his face with his hands. At last she spoke in a voice, changed and strained, a voice that she had never heard, and he dropped his hands and listened. Bolt upright in his chair. "Jack, it's come at last. I've feared it and trembled. Often I have lain awake at night with this on my heart and prayed that I might die before you should ever know of it. For I love you, Jack. And if you go away, I cannot live. I have deceived you. It happened before I knew you, but since the first day when you found me weeping in Luxembourg and spoke to me, Jack, I have been faithful to you in every thought and deed. I loved you from the first and did not dare to tell you this, fearing that you would go away. And since then my love has grown and I've suffered. But I dared not tell you, and now you know. But you do not know the worst. For him, now. Do I care? He was cruel, so cruel." She hid her face in her arms. "Must I go on? Must I tell you? Could you not imagine, oh Jack?" Did not stir. His eyes seemed dead. "So young, I knew nothing. He said he loved me." Trent rose and struck the candle with his clenched fist, and the room was dark. The bells of St. Piss told the hour, and she stared, tweaking with feverish haste. "I must finish. When you told me you loved me, you asked me nothing. But then, even then, it was too late. And that other life which binds me to him must stand forever between you and me. For there is another whom he has claimed. And it is good too. He must not die. They cannot shoot him for that other's sake." Trent sat motionless, but his thoughts ran on an interminable whirl. Little Sylvia, who shared with him his student life, who bore within the dreary desolation of the siege without complaint. The slender, blue-eyed girl whom was so quietly fond of, whom he teased and caressed as the whim suited. Who sometimes made him the least bit impatient with her passionate devotion to him. Could this be the same Sylvia who lay weeping there in the darkness? Then he clenched his teeth. Let him die, let him die. But then, for Sylvia's sake, and for that other's sake. Yes, he would go, he must go. His duty was plain before him, but Sylvia, he could not be what he had been to her, and yet a vague terror seized him. Now all was said. Trembling, he struck a light. Was plain before, but Sylvia, he could not be what he... Struck a light. She lay there, her curly hair streaming about her face, her small white hands pressed to her breast. He could not leave her, and he knew he could not stay. He never knew before that he loved her. She had been a mere comrade, this girl wife of his. He loved her now with all his heart and soul, and he knew it. Only when it was too late. Too late, why? When he thought of that other one, binding her, linking her forever to the creature who stood in danger of his life. With an oath he sprang to the door, but the door would not open. Or was it that he pressed back, locked it, and flung himself to his knees beside the bed, knowing that he dared not, for his life's sake, leave what was his all in life. Chapter 3. It was 4 in the morning when he came out of the prison of the condemned with the secretary of the American legation. A knot of people had gathered around the American minister's carriage, which stood in front of the prison, the horses stamping and pawing in the icy street. The coachman huddled on the box, wrapped in furs. Southwark helped the secretary into the carriage and shook hands with Trent, thanking him for coming. "How the scoundrel did stare," he said. "Your evidence was worse than a kick, but it saved his skin for the moment at least, and prevented complications." The secretary sighed. "Done our part. I'll let them prove him a spy, and we wash our hands of him. Jump in, Captain. Come along, Trent." "I have a word to say to Captain Southwark. I won't detain him," said Trent hastily, and dropping his voice. "Southwark, help me now. You know the story from the blackguard. You know the child is at his rooms. Get it and take it to my own apartment. And if he is shot, I will provide a home for it." "I understand," said the captain gravely. "Will you do it at once?" once, he replied. Their hands met in a warm clasp, and then Captain Southwark climbed into the carriage, motioning Trent to follow, but he shook his head, saying goodbye, and the carriage rolled away. He watched the carriage at the end of the street, then started toward his own quarter, but after a step or two hesitated, stopped, and finally turned away the opposite direction. Something, perhaps, with the sight of the prisoner he had so recently confronted nauseated him. He felt the need of solitude and quiet to collect his thoughts. The events of the evening had shaken him terribly, but he would walk it off, forget, bury everything, and then go back to Sylvia. He started on swiftly, and for a time the bitter thoughts seemed to fade. But when he paused at last, breathless under the Arc de Triomphe, the bitterness and wretchedness of the whole thing, yes, of his whole misspent life, came back with a pang, and the face of the prisoner, stamped with the horrible grimace of fear, grew in shadows before his eyes. Sick at heart, he wandered up and down under the great arcs, striving to occupy his mind, peered up at the sculptured cornices to read the names of the heroes and battles which he knew were engraved there. But always the ashen face of Hartman followed him, grinning with terror. Or was it terror? Was it not triumph? The thought, he leaped like a man who feels a knife at his throat, but after a savage tramp around the square, came back and sat down to battle with his misery. The air was cold, but his cheeks were burning with angry shame. Shame, why? Was it because he had married a girl whom chance had made a mother? Did he love her? Was this miserable bohemian existence then his end and aim in life? He turned his eye upon the secrets of his heart and read an evil story, the story of the past, and he covered his face for shame, while keeping time to dull pain throbbing in his head. His heart beat out the story of the future, shame and disgrace. Roused at last from a lethargy which had begun to numb the bitterness of his thoughts, he raised his head and looked about. A sudden fog had settled in the streets, and the arches of the Arc were choked with it. He would go home. A great horror of being alone seized him, but he was not alone. The fog was peopled with phantoms. All around him in the mist they moved, drifting between arches in lengthening lines, and vanished. While from the fog others grew up, swept past, and were engulfed. He was not alone, for even at his side they crowded, touched him, it swarmed before him, beside him, behind him, pressed him back, seized and bore him, and with them through the mist. Down a dim avenue, through lanes and alleys white with fog they moved, and if they spoke their voices were dull as the vapor which shrouded them. At last in front, a bank of masonry and earth caught by a massive iron-barred gate towered up in the fog. Slowly and more slowly they glided, shoulder to shoulder and thigh to thigh. Then all movement ceased. A sudden breeze stirred at the fog. It waved and eddied. Objects became more distant. A pallor crept from the horizon, touching the edges of the watery clouds, and drew dull sparks from 1,000 bayonets. Bayonets, they were everywhere, cleaving the fog or flowing beneath it in rivers of steel. High in the wall of masonry and earth, a great gun loomed, and around it figures moved in silhouettes. Below, a broad torrent of bayonets swept through the iron-barred gateway and on to the shadowy plain. It became lighter, faces grew more distinct among the marching masses, and he recognized one. Philippe. The figure turned its head. Trent cried, "Is there room for me?" But the other one waved his arm in a vague adieu and was gone with the rest. Presently the cavalry began to pass, squadron on squadron, crowding out in the darkness, then many cannons, then an ambulance, then again the endless lines of bayonets. Beside him a cuirassier sat on his streaming horse, and in front, among a group of mounted officers, he saw a general, with the astrakhan color of his gnomon turned up about his bloodless face. Some women were weeping near him, and one was struggling to force a loaf of black bread into a soldier's haystack. A soldier tried to aid her, but the sack was fastened, and his rifle bothered him, so Trent held it, while the woman unbuttoned the sack and forced in the bread, now all wet with her tears. The rifle was not heavy. Trent found it wonderfully manageable. Was the bayonet sharp? He tried it. With a sudden longing, a fierce, imperative desire took possession of. "Gillette!" cried a gunman, clinging to the barred gate. "Encore 3 mots en veut." Trent looked up, and the rat killer laughed in his face. But when the soldier had the rifle again and thanking him, ran hard to catch his battalion, he plunged the throng around the gateway. "Are you going?" he cried to a Marine who sat in the gutter, bandaging his foot. "Yes." Then a girl, a mere child, caught him by the hand and led him to the cafe which faced the gate. The room was crowded with soldiers, some white and silent, sitting on the floor, and others groaning on leather-covered settees. The air was sour and suffocating. "Choose," said the girl, little gesture of pity. "They can't go." A heap of clothing on the floor, he found a compote and kepi. She helped him buckle his knapsack, cartridge box, and belt, and showed him how to load the chase-pot rifle, holding it on her knees. When he thanked her, he started to her feet. "Foreigner. American," he said, moving toward the door. The child barred his way. "I'm a Breton. My father is up cannon of the Marine. He will shoot you if you are a spy." They faced each other for a moment, then sighing, he bent over and kissed the child. "Pray for France, little one," he murmured, and she repeated with a pale smile, "For France and you, bon monsieur." She ran across the street and through the gateway. Once outside, he edged into the line and shouldered his way along the road. The corporal passed him, looked at him, passed, and finally called an officer. "He belonged to the 60th, growled the corporal, looking at the number on his kepi. "We have no use for Franc tourists," added the officer, catching sight of his black trousers. "I wish to volunteer in place of a comrade," said Trent, and the officer shrugged his shoulders and pressed on. Nobody paid much attention to him. One or two merely glanced at his trousers. The road was deep with slush and mud plowed and torn by wheels and hoofs. A soldier in front of him wrenched for his foot in an icy rut and dragged himself to the edge of the embankment, groaning. The plain on either side of them was gray with melting snow. Here and there behind dismantled hedgerows stood wagons, wearing white flags with red crosses. Sometimes the driver was a priest in a rusty hat and gown. Sometimes a crippled mobile. Once they passed a wagon driver by a sister of charity. Silent, empty houses with great rents in their walls, and every window blank. Huddled along the road. Further on, within the zone of danger, nothing of human habitation remained except here and there a pile of frozen bricks, and a blackened cellar choked with snow. For some time, Trent had been annoyed by a man behind him, who kept treading on his heels, convinced at last it was intentional. He turned to remonstrate him, found face to face with a fellow student from the Beaux-Arts. Trent stared. "I thought you were in the hospital." The other shook his head, pointed to his bandaged jaw. "I see you can't speak. Can I do anything?" The wounded man rummaged in his haversack and produced a crust of black bread. "He can't eat it. His jaw is smashed, and he wants you to chew it for him," said the soldier next to him. Trent took the crust, grinding in his teeth morsel by morsel, passed it back to the starving man. Time to time, mounted orderlies bent to the front, covering them with slush. It was a chilly, solid march through sodden meadows wreathed in fog. Along the railroad embankment across the ditch, another column moved parallel to their own. Trent watched it, a somber mass, now distinct, now vague, now blotted and in puff of fog. Once for half an hour he lost it, but when it came into view he noticed a thin line detach itself from the flank, and belt lying in the middle, swinging rapidly to the west. At the same moment a prolonged crackling broke out in the fog in front. Other lines began to slow off in the column, swinging east and west, and the crackling became continuous. A battery passed at full gallop, and he drew back with his comrades to give it way. It went with action a little to the right of his battalion, and as he shot from the first rifled piece boomed through the mist. The cannon from the fortifications opened with a mighty roar. An officer galloped by shouting something which Trent did not catch, but he saw the ranks in front suddenly part company with his own, and disappeared into the twilight. More officers rode up and stood beside him, peering into the fog. Away in front, the crackling had become one prolonged crash. It was dreary waiting. Trent chewed. Officers rode up and stood back. Trent chewed some bread for the band behind, who tried to swallow it, and after a while shook his head, wishing Trent to eat the rest himself. A corporal offered him a little brandy, and he drank it. But when he turned around to return the flask, the corporal was lying on the ground. Alarmed, he looked at the soldier next to him, who shrugged his shoulders and opened his mouth to speak. But something struck him, and he rolled over and over into the ditch below. At that moment, the horse of one of the officers gave a round and backed him into the battalion, lashing out with his heels. One man was ridden down, another was kicked to the chest and hurled through the ranks. The officer sank his spurs in the horse and forced him to the front again, where he stood trembling. The cannonade seemed to draw nearer. A staff officer riding slowly up and down the battalion suddenly collapsed in his saddle and clung to his horse's mane. One of his boots dangled, crimsoned and dripping from the stirrup. Then out of the mist, in front men came running. The roads, the fields, the ditches were full of them, and many of them fell. For an instant, he imagined he saw horsemen riding about like ghosts in the vapors beyond, and a man behind him cursed horribly, declaring he too had seen them, and that they were Uhlans. But the battalion stood inactive, and the mist fell again over the meadows. The colonel sat heavily upon his horse, his bullet-shaped head buried in the and collar of his dolman, his fat legs sticking straight out in the stirrups. The buglers clustered about him with bugles poised, and behind him a staff officer in a pale blue jacket smoked a cigarette and chatted with the captain of the hussars. From the road in front came the sound of furious galloping, and an orderly reined up beside the colonel, who motioned him to the rear without turning his head. Then on the left a confused murmur which ended in a shout. A hussar passed like the wind, followed by another, and then the squadron after squadron whirled by them in the sheeted mist. That instant, the colonel reared his saddle, the bugles clanged, and the whole battalion scrambled down the embankment, over the ditch, and started across the soggy meadow. Almost at once, Trent lost his cap. Something snatched it from his head. He thought it was a tree branch. A good many of his comrades rolled over the slush and ice, and he imagined they had slipped. One pitched right across his path and stopped to help him up, but the man screamed when he touched him, and officer said, "Forward, forward!" So they ran on again. It was a long jog through the mist, and he was often obliged to shift his rifle. At last they lay panting behind the railroad embankment. He looked about him. He had felt the need of action, of a desperate physical struggle, of killing and crushing. He had been seized with the desire to fling himself among masses and tear right and left. He longed to fire, to use the thin, sharp bayonet on his chestpot. He had not expected this. He wished to become exhausted, to struggle and cut until incapable of lifting his arm. Then he had intended to go home. He heard a man say that half the battalion had gone down in the charge, and he saw another examining a corpse under the embankment. The body, still warm, was clothed in a strange uniform, but even when he noticed the spiked helmet lying a few inches further away, he did not realize what had happened. The colonel sat on his horse, a few feet to the left, his eyes sparkling under the crimson kepi. Trent heard him reply to an officer, "I can hold it, but for another charge, and I won't have enough men left to sound a bugle." "Are the Prussians here?" Trent asked of a soldier who sat wiping the blood trickling from his hair. "Yes, the hussars cleaned them out. We caught their crossfire. We're supporting a cavalry on the embankment. Or we're supporting a battery on the embankment," said another. Then the battalion crawled over the embankment and moved along the lines of twisted rails. Trent rolled up his trousers and tucked them into his wool socks, but they halted again, and some of the men sat down on the dismantled railroad track. Trent looked for his wounded comrade from the Blue Arts. He was standing in his place, very pale. The cannonade had become terrific. For a moment, the mist fled. He caught a glimpse of the 1st Battalion motionless on the railroad track in front of regiments on either flank, and then, as the fog settled again, the drums beat and the music of the bugles began away on the extreme left. A restless movement passed among the troops. The colonel threw up his arm, and the drums rolled, and the battalion moved off through the fog. They were near the front now, for the battalion was firing as it advanced. Ambulances galloped along the base of the embankment to the rear, and the hussars passed and repassed like phantoms. They were in front at last, for all about them was movement and turmoil, while from the fog close at hand came cries and groans and crashing volleys. Shells fell everywhere, bursting along the embankment, splashing them with frozen slush. Trent was frightened. He began to dread the unknown, which lay there crackling and flaming in obscurity. The shock of the cannon sickened him. He could even see the fog light up with a dull orange as the thunder shook the earth. It was near, he felt certain, for the colonel shouted forward. The 1st Battalion was hastening into it. He felt its breath. He trembled, but hurried on. A fear-filled discharge in front terrified him. Somewhere in the fog, men were cheering, and the colonel's horse, streamed with blood, plunged about in the smoke. Another blast and shock right in his face almost stunned him, and he faltered. All the men to the right were shot down. His head swam, the fog and smoke stupefied him. He put out his hand for support and caught something. It was the wheel of a gun carriage. The man sprang from behind it, aiming a blow at his head with a rammer, but stumbled back shrieking with the bayonet through his neck, and Trent knew that he had killed. Mechanically, he stooped to pick up his rifle, but the bayonet was still in the man, who lay beating with red hands against the sod. It sickened him, and he leaned on the cannon. Men were fighting all around him now, and the air was foul with smoke and sweat. Somebody seized him from behind, and another in front, but others in turn seized them or struck them solid blows. The click, click, click of bayonets infuriated him. Then he grasped the rammer and struck out blindly until it was shivered to pieces. A man threw his arm around his neck and bore him to the ground, but he throttled him and raised himself to his knees. He saw a comrade seize the cannon and fall across it with his skull crushed in. He saw the colonel tumble clean out of his saddle and into the mud. Then consciousness fled. When he came to himself, he was lying in the embankment on the twisted rails. On every side, huddled men who cried out and cursed and flung away into the fog, and he staggered his feet and followed them. Once he stopped to help a comrade with a bandaged jaw who could not speak but clung to his arm for a time and then fell dead into the freezing mire. Again he aided another who groaned, "Trent, c'est moi, Philippe," until a sudden volley in the midst relieved him of his charge. An icy wind swept down from the heights, cutting the fog into shreds. For an instant, with an evil leer, the sun peered through the naked woods of Vincennes, sank like a blood clot in the battery smoke, lower into the blood-soaked plain. Alright. Chapter 4. When midnight sounded from the belfry of Saint-Sulpice, the gates of Paris were still choked with fragments of what had once been an army. They entered within the night, a sudden horde splattered with slime, faint with hunger and exhaustion. There was little disorder at first. The throng at the gates parted silently as the troops tramped along the freezing streets. Confusion came as the hours passed. Swiftly and more swiftly, crowding squadron after squadron, and battery on battery, horses plunging and caissons jolting. The remnants from the front surged to the gates, a chaos of cavalry and artillery struggling for the right of way. Close upon them stumbled the infantry, here a skeleton of a regiment marching with a desperate attempt at order, there a riotous mob of mobiles crushing their way to the streets, then a turmoil of horsemen, cannon, troops without officers, officers without men, then again a line of ambulances, the wheels groaning under their heavy loads. Dumb with misery, the crowd looked on. All through the day the ambulance had been arriving, and all day long the ragged throng whimpered and shivered by the barriers. At noon the crowd was increased tenfold, filling the square about the gates, and swarming over the inner fortifications. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the German batteries suddenly wreathed themselves in smoke. The shells fell silent on Montparnasse. At 20 minutes after 4, 2 projectiles struck a house in the Rue du Bac, and a moment later the first shell fell in the Latin Quarter. Braith was painting in bed when West came in, very much scared. "Wish you would come down. Our house has been knocked into a cocked hat. I'm afraid that some of the pillagers may take it in their heads to pay us a visit tonight." Braith jumped out of bed and bundled himself into a garment which had once been an overcoat. "But hurt?" inquired, struggling with a sleeve full of dilapidated lining. "No. Colette is barricaded in the cellar, and the concierge ran away to the fortifications. There'll be a rough gang there if the bombardment keeps up. You might help us." "Of course," said Braith. It's not until he had reached the Rue Serpent and a turned-in passage which led to West Cellar that the latter cried, "Have you seen Jack Trent today?" "No," replied. "He was not at ambulance headquarters." "He stayed to take care of Sylvia, I suppose." A bomb came crashing through the roof of the house at the end of the alley and burst into the basement, showering the street with slate and plaster. A second struck a chimney and plunged into the garden, followed by an avalanche of bricks. Another exploded with a deafening report in the next street. Then hurried along the passage to the steps which led to the cellar. Here again Bray stopped. "Don't you think I'd better up and see if Jax and Sylvia were well entrenched? I can get back before dark." "No. Go in and find Colette, I'll go." "No. Let me go, there's no danger." "I know it," replied Wes calmly, dragging Braith into the alley. Point to the cellar steps. The iron door was barred. "Colette! Colette!" he called. The door swung inward, and the girl sprang up to the stairs to meet them. At that instant, Braith glanced behind them, gave a startled cry, and pushed the two before him in the cellar and jumped down and slammed the iron door. A few seconds later, a jar from the outside shook the hinges. "They're here," muttered Wes, very pale. "The door," observed Colette calmly, "will hold forever." Braith examined the low iron structure. No trembling of blows rained on from without. Wes glanced anxiously at Colette, who displayed no agitation, and this comforted him. "I believe they'll spend much time here," said Brave. They only rummage in cellars for spirits, I imagine, unless they hear that valuables are buried here." Surely nothing is buried here," exclaimed Brave uneasily. "Fortunately, there is," growled West, "that miserly landlord of mine." A crash from the outside, followed by a yell, cut him short. Then blow after blow shook the doors until there came a sharp snap. Clinging of metal and a triangular bit of iron fell inwards, leaving a hole through the struggled ray of light. Instantly, West knelt, and shoving his revolver through the aperture, fired every cartridge. In a moment, the alley resounded with the racket of the revolver, and absolute silence followed. Presently, a single questioning blow fell upon the door, and a moment later another and another, and then a sudden crack zigzagged across the iron plate. "Here," said West, seizing Colette by the wrist. "You follow me, Braith." He ran swiftly toward a circular spot of light at the further end of the cellar. The spot of light came from a barred manhole above. West motioned Brave to mount on his shoulders. "Push it over, you must." Full effort, Braith lifted the barred cover, scrambled on his stomach, and easily raised Colette from West's shoulders. "Quick, old chap," cried the latter. Brave twisted his legs around a fence chain and leaned down again. The cellar was flooded with yellow light, and the air reeked with the stench of petroleum torches. The iron door still held, but a whole plate of metal was gone, and now as they looked, a figure came creeping through, holding a torch. "Quick," whispered Braith, "jump!" As hung dangling until grasped him by the collar, and he was dragged out. Then her nerves gave way, and she wept hysterically, but West threw his arm around her and led her across the gardens into the next street, where Braith, after replacing the manhole cover and piling some stone slabs from the wall over it, rejoined them. It was almost dark. They hurried through the street, not only lighted by burning buildings or the swift glare of the shells. They gave wide berth to the fires, but at distance saw the fleeting forms of pillagers among the debris. Sometimes they passed a female fury crazed as drank shrieking anathemas upon the world, or some slouching lout whose blackened face and hands betrayed his share in the work of destruction. At last they reached the Seine and passed the bridge and said, "Go back. I'm not sure of Jack and Sylvia." As he spoke, he made way for a crowd which came trampling across the bridge and along the river wall by the Say barracks in the midst of it. West caught the measured tread of a platoon. A lantern passed, a file of bayonets, then another lantern which glimmered on a deathly face behind. And Colette gasped, "Hartman!" and he was gone. They peered fearfully across the embankment, hold their breath. There was a shuffle of feet on the quay. The gate of the barracks slammed. A lantern shone for a moment at the postern. The crowd passed to the grill. Then came the clang of the volley from the stone parade. One by one, the petroleum torches flared up along the embankment. Now the whole square was in motion. Down from the Champs-Élysées and across the Place de Concorde struggled the fragments of the battle. A company here and a mob there. They poured in from everywhere, followed by women and children in a great murmur borne on the icy wind, swept from the Arc de Triomphe and down the dark avenue. Pardieu, pardieu! A ragged end of a battalion was pressing past, the spectre of annihilation. West groaned, then a figure sprang from the shadowy ranks and called West's name. And when he saw it was Trent. He cried out, Trent seized him white with terror. Sylvia! Stared speechless, but Colette moaned. Sylvia, Sylvia! They're shelling the quarter. Trent! Shouted Braith, but he was gone, and they could not overtake him. The bombardment ceased as Trent crossed the boulevards Saint-Germain. But the entrance to the Rue des Sons was blocked by a heap of smoking bricks. Everywhere the shells had torn great holes in the pavement. The cafe was a wreck of splinters and glass, the bookstore tottered, ripped from roof to basement, and the lithe little bakery, long since closed, bulged outward above a mass of slate and tin. He climbed up over the steaming bricks and buried into the Rue de Tournon. In the corner, a fire blazed, lighting up his own street, and on the bank wall beneath a shattered gas lamp, a child was writing with a bit of cinder. Here fell the first shell. The letter stared him in the face. The rat killer finished and set back to view his work, but catching sight of Trent's bayonet, screamed and fled. As Trent staggered across the shattered street, from holes and crannies in the ruins, fierce women fled from their work of pillage, cursing him. At first he could not find his house, for the tears blinded him, but he felt along the wall and reached the door. A lantern burned in the concierge's lodge. The old man lay dead beside it. Faint with fright, he leaned over a moment on his rifle, and snatching the lantern, sprang up the stairs. He tried to call, but his tongue hardly moved. The second floor he saw plaster on the stairway, and on the third floor was torn, and the concierge lay in a pool of blood across the landing. The next floor was theirs. The door hung from its hinges. The walls gaped. He crept in and sank down by the bed. And there, two arms were flung around his neck, and a tear-stained... his neck and a tear-stained face sought his own. Sylvia! Jack, Jack, Jack! Tumbled pillow beside them, a child wailed. They brought it. In his mind, she sobbed. Ours, he whispered, with his arms around them both. Then from the stairs below came Braith's anxious voice. Trent, is all well? Is the end of that? Okay. So we will finish this next time. But I hope y'all enjoyed that. And, yeah. Well, I'm not sure what that last story had to do with the King in Yellow. I mean, it talked about, like, with the story that was saying that there was the wars going on, but... Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll finish up this collection of stories next time.